series of lectures of database management system, today we have discussed about the entity relationship diagrams. We discussed many models about the databases that used to organize the data and to show the relationship between the data and to also check for the constraint that we have applied at the time of the creation of the databases. So today we have discussed one of the model that is called the entity relationship diagram that is used to organize the data and to show the relationship between the data, but with the help of the conceptual diagrams, or we can say that in the form of the diagrams. So ER diagrams or the entity relationship diagram is a conceptual model that gives the graphical representation of the logical structure of the databases. It shows all the constraints and the relationship that exist among the different components of the diagrams. We have represented this ER diagram with the help of the graphical representation or in the form of the diagrams. So we have some components that needed to draw any diagram for any databases. What are these components of the ER diagram? These components are entity sets, attributes and the relationship. We can draw any diagram with these three components. One is the entity set, second is the attribute and third is the relationship set. So we have used certain symbols to represent entity sets, attributes and the relationship. We have used different symbols for representing the different things. First, we have used the rectangle box that is used to show the relationship. That is used to show the entity, any entity. We have two types of entities. One is the strong entity and second is the weak entity. If an entity has a primary key that makes that entity as distinguishable from the other object on the basis of that particular primary key, then that entity is called the strong entity set. Otherwise, we have weak entity that does not contain a primary key, and we represent that entity set with the help of the double rectangles. Then ER diagrams used to show the relationship between different entities. We can say that we have these two entities, one is this entity and one is this entity. If this entity is a student, and this entity is course, and if we want to represent the relationship between this entity, then this relationship is shown by this rectangle, this diamond box, that student enrolls in a particular course. So this enroll show the relationship between this student and relationship between this course. To show the relationship between two entities, we use the symbol diamond box to represent the relationship. Relationship is always for a relationship, either we have one entity, either we have two entities, and either we have number of entities. We can discuss already about the weak entity set and strong entity set. If our entity set is weak, I'll say that this entity is weak, then the relationship with this entity is automatically be weak relationship, and weak relationship is again represented by the double diamond box. Then we can say that any entities is distinguished on the basis of certain properties. That properties are called the attributes. So we can represent this attributes with the oval shape that represent the property of a particular entity. For example, we have an entity student and we make this student as an entity on the basis of the properties of the student. What are these properties? Like roll number, name, date of birth, address of the student. So these all are roll number, name, these all are the attributes of the student. So this attribute is represented by the oval shape. We have different representation for the attribute because we have different type of attributes. One is the key attribute, that is called also the primary attribute. The primary attribute is that on the basis of that we have differentiate one entity from the other entity. For example, we have many students and the roll number of each student is different. So the roll number is act as a key attribute for the entity set student. So this roll number we have indicated by the dash line. If we have make a roll number as an attribute of this entity, we will underline this if this is a primary attribute or the key attribute of the entity. Then we have multi-valued attribute. Multi-valued attribute we have represented by the double oval. What is multi-valued attribute? The multi-attribute is that will have more than one value. For example, a student maybe have 2 phone numbers. So we have more than one value for the phone number. So we will represent this phone number attribute with the help of the double oval shape. Then we have composite attributes. If an attribute can be divided into the number of attributes, for example, the name of a person is divided into the first name, middle name and the last name. Then this attribute is represented like this, that it is name, this is the first name, this is the middle name and this is the last name. Then we have derived attribute. What is derived attribute? Derived attribute is that on the basis of another attribute, if we are possible to derive some value of the another attribute. For example, if the date of birth is given to us, then on the basis of that we are able to calculate the age of the student, and we will represent this age by the dashed line. This is used to representing the derived attribute. For example, the age of a student can be calculated on the basis of the date of birth if the date of birth is given to us. Then we have total participation. Total participation means that we have two types of participation of an entity into a relationship. One is the total participation and second is the partial participation. Total participation is represented by the double dash. Then we have cardinality ratio. We have different type of cardinality ratio like 1 to 1, 1 to many, many to 1 and many to many. We can represent this with the help of this 1 to 1, 1 to many to many, mn, many to many, mn, many to 1, m ratio 1 and 1 to 1, 1 is 1. So we have different form of to represent the cardinality ratio. So with the help, we can represent an entity with the help of an example. Here the database is given to us, that is the database of the student, in which we have 3 attributes. One is the roll number, second is the name and third is the age. We can represent this student database with the help of the ER diagram, that we have an entity student. So we represent this entity in the rectangle box and we have 3 attributes of this student, that is roll number, name and age. That is roll number, name and age. Roll number is the primary key of this table because the roll number of different student is different. So we will add this roll number as a key attribute and we will underline this attribute. So the roll number is a primary key that can identify each entity uniquely. Thus, using the student roll number, a student can be identified uniquely. Primary key is that on the basis of that we can uniquely identify the each entity of the entity set. Then we have ER diagram symbols, and ER diagram is composed of several components like entity relationship between the different entities and the attributes of the entity set. So first we will discuss for the entity set. What is the entity set? An entity set is a set of some type of entities. For example, in a college, we have different type of courses like BTech, AmTech, MBA, BBA, we have different type of courses. So these all have their properties, but these are the similar type of entities. So we will combine these all courses into a single entity set, that is called the course. What is entity? If we combine the similar type of entity, then it will become an entity set. But what is entity? An entity refers to an object having either a physical existence such as particular person, office, house or a car, or we can say that anything in the real world that exists in the real world, if we are able to distinguish that entity on the basis of some attributes or some properties, then that is called the entity. So either physical existence such as the person, office, house or car, if we are able to distinguish these things from the other thing on the basis of certain properties, then we can say that these are the entities. Or we also have the conceptual existence such as a school or a company. These all are the entities again. So we have two types of entities. First is the strong entity set and second is the weak entity set. Strong entity set, that entity set that contain the primary key, that is called the strong entity set. For example, student, and we have an attribute of this student is roll number that uniquely identify the each entity in this entity set, that is student. So that is called a strong entity set. If we have an entity set that does not contain any primary key, then that is called the weak entity set. For example, we have a entity loan. And for that we have a key, that is loan number. If we see in journal, we see that loan number is act as a primary key. but it's not necessary that loan number be a primary key. For example, we have customer, for a single customer we have multiple number of loans. Mana, we have a customer, and for A we have two loans, 1 and 2. For the first loan, here make the payment, first payment we will give number as a 1. We will make another payment, we will give this number as a 2. We will make another payment for the first loan, we will give this number as a 3. We will make the first payment for the second loan, we will give this number as a 1. And for the second loan, we again give as a number as 2. And for the third payment, we will give the number as a 3. For a different loan, we have the same loan number, that is 1 and 1. If we simply see this loan number, that will act as a primary key, but actually this is not as a primary key. This will work as a discriminator for this loan entity set. So, here the loan number is not act as a primary key. So, in this entity, we have not any attribute that will act as a primary key. So, this will consider as a weak entity set, and we represent this weak entity set with the help of this double rectangle. So, these are the diagrammatic representations of representing the strong entity set and the weak entity set. Weak entity set is represented by a single rectangle, and double entity set and weak entity set is represented by the double rectangles. Then for relationship set, for the notation we have used for the relationship set is represented by the diamond box. The relationship defines an association among several entities. A relationship set is a set of same type of relationships. Again, a relationship set be of two types, that is strong relationship and weak relationship, or weak relationship is also called the identifying relationship. We can say that if we have a weak entity, then the relationship associated with this weak entity is again a weak relationship. Automatically, the relationship with the weak entity set is automatically the weak relationship. So, a strong relationship exists between two strong entity set. It is represented using a diamond box. And the weak entity set or a weak identifying relationships exist between the strong entity set and the weak entity set. It is represented using a double diamond symbol. Is the weak entity set also exists between the two weak entity set? No, because we have need to be define the primary key of the weak entity set, that will be defined on the basis of the strong entity set. So, relationship set is always be weak between the one strong entity set and one weak entity set. So, the relationship set, a relationship set is a set of relationships of same type. For example, we have representing in a ER diagram that in which we have a strong entity set, that is student, and we have another entity set, that is course entity set. So, this is representing the strong relationship between the student and the course, that a student enroll in a course, and in a course we have number of students. We have different type of degree of relationship set, that we have 4 type of relationship between the different ER diagrams, that is unary relationship set, binary relationship set, ternary relationship set, and unary relationship set. So, first we discuss about the unary relationship set. In unary relationship set, we have only one entity. That unary relationship set is a relationship set where only one entity set participates in the relationship set. For example, here is given that we have an entity set of a person and the relationship between this person is married to. So, the person is married to a person definitely. So, we have single entity, that is person, and the relationship between this person to person is to married to. So, this is called the unary relationship. That relationship exists only between the one entity. Then we have binary relationship set. The binary relationship set is a relationship set where two entity sets participates in the relationship set. For example, we have a relationship that is enrolled in. So, this enrolled in is a relationship between the student entity and between the course entity. Student enroll for a course, and in a course we have the number of students enroll in a particular course. So, this is the relationship between two entities, and this is called the type of binary relationship. Then we have ternary relationship set. Ternary relationship set is a relationship set where the three entity sets participates in the relationship set. For example, here we have three entities, one is the employer, second is the department, and third is the location. And in all these three entities, we have only one relationship, that is works in. So this is ternary relationship, that the relationship between the three entities. That is, employee works in a particular department, the employee work in a particular location, the department is located in a particular, the department works in a particular location. So we have finding the relationship between any of the entities here given. Then we have an Unary relationship set. Then an Unary relationship set is a relationship set where an entity sets participates in a relationship set. Here we have any number of entities involved in a relationship. So these are the types of relationship set that unary, when we have only one entity set, binary, when the relationship exists between two entities, then we have ternary, when the relationship exists between the three entities, and unary, when we have any number of an entity set participates in the relationship set. Then now we have discussed the different type of attributes. We already discussed the notation that we have used for defining the attributes in the ER diagram. The attributes are the properties which describes the entities of an entity set. We can say that an entity become an entity on the basis of its properties only, on the basis of its attributes only. Without an attribute, without an property, the entity doesn't matter. We can make that entity on the basis of only on their attributes. So we have the several type of attributes. One is the simple attribute. For the notation that we have used for simple attribute, that is only oval shape. For example, that we have roll number, phone number, these are the simple attributes that have only one value. Then it's represented with the simple oval shaped. Then we have multi-attribute. For example, phone number, which multi-attribute is that for which we have the number of values. For example, phone number, address may be the address of a person. For example, the person have two addresses. So one is permanent and one is temporary address. So for that, for address we have more than one values, and for phone number also we have more than one values. So these are the multi-valued attributes, and for that the shape we have used is the double oval shape. Third is the composite attribute that can be divided into the number of attributes. For example, name. Name of a person is divided into the first name, middle name, and the last name. So this is the composite attribute. Another example of composite attribute is address. Address is divided into street, city, state, and country. Then we have the key attribute. The attribute that acts as a primary key of any entity set that uniquely identified that database. That attribute is actually called the prime attribute, or is actually called the key attribute. For example, we have already discussed for the student entity set, we have an attribute that is primary, that is roll number, that uniquely identify the database of a student. Then roll number is act as a key attribute, and this is shown by the line. Then we have partial attribute. Partial attribute is that can be derived from that on the basis of that we can derive certain, we can make the primary key with the strong entity set. For example, we have already discussed that loan number. Loan number is an attribute of an entity loan. But this loan number is not a primary key that acts as a discriminator for that loan entity set. So this is called as partial attribute that actually not act as a primary key but work as a discriminator. When we define the primary key for that particular weak entity set on the basis of a strong entity set, then this will work. The primary key of strong entity set and discriminator of the weak entity set makes a primary key for the weak entity set. So that attribute is act as a partial attribute, and this is shown by the dash line. This dash line, it means that it's not actually a primary key, but it works as a primary key. It works as a discriminator for that particular entity. Then we have derived attribute. Derived attribute is that the values of this attribute is derived from the another attributes. This attribute is dependent on the another attribute. For example, in an entity, the date of birth of a student is given to us. but the age of a student is not given to us. If we want the age of that particular student, then we can derive this age on the basis of the date of birth that given to us, and we have represent this attribute with the help of this dashed oval shape. So these are the different attributes that are used in the ER diagram for representing the different type of attributes. First is a simple attribute that have only the attributes that cannot be divided further, that have only single values. That attributes are called the simple attribute, for example, roll number, class and age. Then we have composite attributes that can be divided into multiple of attributes. For example, student address is divided into street, city, country and state. And this name is again a composite attribute that can be divided into first name, middle name and the last name. So this is also act as a composite attribute. Then we have single valued attribute. This is the single valued attribute. All the attributes have only single values. Then we have multi-valued attributes. Here mobile number and email ID has a multi-valued attribute. It means a student have more than one mobile number and the student have more than one mail ID. Then we have derived attribute. We have derived attribute is a age that can be derived on the basis of the date of birth. Then key attribute. Here the roll number is act as a key attribute because the roll number, for every student we have the different roll number. So here roll number is the attribute that can uniquely identify each entity in this entity set, that is student. Then we will talk about the participation constraint. As we shown that we have total participation and the partial participation. Participation constraints defines the user number of relationship instances in which an entity has to be necessarily participate. There are two types of participation constraints. One is the partial participation and second is the total participation. So what is the partial participation? Partial participation is represented using a single line between the entity set and the relationship set. Whereas the total participation is representing using a double line between the entity set and the relationship set. So this diagram shows the partial participation and this diagram shows the total participation, as we have shown this by the double line. If we are using the double line, then we have represented this with the help of the double lines. So for this lecture, thank you. We have discussed the different type of examples of the ER diagram and specialization, generalization and the aggregation properties of the ER diagram also. So thank you for the same.